It was only a matter of time before we started to hear about what Nvidia had planned when they bring Ada Lovelace to the mainstream GPU market. At this point, I'm not surprised by what's going on here, but it's worth pointing out their antics for people who may not be informed about the garbage and might be considering one of these GPUs. Let's discuss that in this video. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on guys, Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. With the recent launch of Nvidia's RTX 4070 Ti graphics card, which was targeted towards the middle high-end segment, the next stage is set for Nvidia to launch their quote-unquote cheaper graphics card to the market that typically targets the mid-range and mainstream segment. Before we get into the main topic and discuss the recent leaks, I just wanted to briefly talk about what's going on currently. It seems like not much has changed since we talked about the GPU market. RTX 4070 Ti's and 4080s are still continuing to rot on shelves, and that is indeed a good thing. And I'm also noticing that RTX 4090s are now readily available, at least here in Canada, that is. So not much has changed, and the reason why I said that is a good thing is because this is a step-by-step process. If people started to cave in and started buying GPUs again, then Nvidia would have been like, oh shit, it looks like, the early outrage has settled, and people are buying the hardware again. When they see that the hardware isn't selling, people aren't interested in these cards, and we're barely moving units, then they're going to realize they screwed up, and it'll be time to lower down prices. But that only happens if people choose not to buy. I don't know what Nvidia's minimum target is here, and if they're really prioritizing high margins this time over volume, which if we take into account everything we've seen so far, and the next things that I'm going to be discussing, definitely seems like it, they may not ever end up dropping prices. If there are any discounts you see, it'll probably come from the retailer side because they're the ones at the end who are responsible for moving units, and once Nvidia's shipped it, they've shipped it. It's out of their hands. It looks worse on them when they have inventory that's sitting for a while that's not touched. As someone who's worked at a major PC hardware retailer, this was a stat that was closely monitored. Now, if you bought one, don't feel bad. If you were completely out of a GPU and you really wanted to get into PC gaming, it is what it is. I know we've talked about alternatives in my previous video, but I also understand that if you don't have a decent GPU from the previous generation or your current one broke, then you do what you have to do. If you're happy, that's all that matters. There was also a recent report that came from HKEPC where there's a new variant of the 8103 die, which is what the RTX 4080 is based on. It said that this new version was supposed to be cheaper, but all they've done is integrated the voltage regulator onto the die itself, so there's no need for partners to implement that component onto their PCBs. This will reduce overall production costs, but if you were thinking that this was going to result in drastic price drops for consumers, you'd be dead wrong. In fact, we're only looking at a mere $1 decrease in terms of production costs from what's been reported, so hardly a difference, one that you won't notice. What you will notice though are the anti-consumer tactics that Nvidia will be pushing when they bring their next mainstream GPU to the market. This story was posted over at Video Cards, who are sourcing Kopite7Kimi, who is a very well-known hardware leaker in the GPU market and has leaked several of Nvidia GPU specs before, so I would say they're pretty trustworthy, though you should still take it with a grain of salt. What they tweeted was a follow-up to an older tweet they tweeted from last month, December, where they posted specs of the RTX 4060 Ti, a small Ada Lovelace GPU based on the 8106 die. This time they mentioned that there's a change in the specs where the 4060 Ti will now have a TDP of 160 watts down from 220 watts. I know this seems like quite a substantial drop, but honestly guys, I have proved multiple times on this channel that Nvidia pushes their silicon really hard, and in some cases dropping 80 to 100 watts in games leads to hardly any performance loss. So I don't think this will greatly impact its performance from where it was when the specs were first drafted. That's not to say that the performance is going to be good or anything to get excited about or was good. We'll talk about that in just a moment. With the updated TDP, this is actually a positive change because now that the requirement for the coolers won't be so large, they can get away with smaller configurations, less materials, which means less costs, hopefully. They could still price hike this GPU, and we'd be screwed regardless. But the other benefit to this change is that manufacturers won't be like, hey, let's just stick on an RTX 4070 Ti cooler on this and call it a day. Case compatibility should be greatly improved if they put a much more sensible cooler on this thing. But since we're on the subject of specs, let's talk about that because I didn't really go too into depth about it in my last video when I had discussed the RTX 4060 Ti initially, and if you were pissed off by what Nvidia did with the RTX 4070 Ti, then this GPU is going to piss you off even more. Some people argue that at the end of the day, who cares about specs? Who cares about what the card is called? All that matters is performance, and you're partially right. However, you have to realize that the performance stems from the composition of the card specs. If they're not good, then it's going to have shit performance, and depending on how it performs relative to last gen and current gen models, then it should have an appropriate name with an appropriate price tag. Do I think that the RTX 4080 has the right name despite the specs? Well, if we were to take a look at this GPU's performance, and we'll use Tech Power-Up's review numbers here, we can see that the 4080 is about 50% faster than the previous gen 3080. In some charts, we can see that the difference between the 3080 and 2080 is about 63%. So not quite as big as the leap we got from Turing to Ampere, but let me ask you this, if the 4080 was sold for the same price as what the RTX 3080 sold for, that being $699, would you be complaining right now? No, you wouldn't. And if we adjust for inflation plus the rising cost of materials and price it at say $849, would you still be complaining? Probably not. So I'd argue that the 4080 has the right name, it's just at a stupid price point. You will find, however, that this is not going to be the case for the RTX 4060 Ti. This card doesn't deserve to be called an RTX 4060 Ti based on the specs we're seeing here, and if the recent pricing rumors are true, then it's going to be DOA in my opinion. Video cards have a table which has both of the specs for the upcoming 4060 Ti and the outgoing RTX 3060 Ti. Now, when the RTX 3060 Ti came out, I actually got the chance to review that card and gave it a mostly positive review. At that time, prices, however, were on the rise, but I still said, hey, this is actually a really good graphics card if you can somehow find it near MSRP. It was a significant leap over the RTX 2060 Super and managed to edge out my RTX 2080 Super. Nvidia did also release a GDDR6X version of the graphics card not too long ago, and it was basically on par with an RTX 3070. But you could overclock the original model, overclock the memory, and it'd be very close to an RTX 3070. This 4060 Ti, however, looks like hot garbage. It's got less CUDA cores, the same 8GB of G6 memory, not even faster GDDR6 memory, and for a GPU coming out in 2023 and only having 8GB of memory, that's pathetic. But it's also got a really slim memory bus, a 128-bit bus, so we're looking at a drop of around 53% in regards to memory bandwidth. Copite on Twitter replied to a user who asked what performance this new 4060 Ti would be targeting, and he stated it was the RTX 3070, which is much worse than I thought. Based on the specs, I thought at best it would be sitting around an RTX 3070 Ti level, but it gets worse. According to My Drivers, who are a Chinese hardware site, they're claiming that the RTX 4060 Ti will be less than $500, aka $499 or probably $479 at best. So not only are you getting a small performance upgrade over the 3060 Ti, it's going to have worse specs relative to its previous gen model, it's going to be more expensive, which really isn't progress. This is another example of market regression. So taking that into account, it does seem like this card is getting price hiked, and Nvidia is just chasing after the highest margins possible. The good news is that unlike previous high-end graphics cards, which seem to be out of stock or discontinued from retailers, you can still easily find cards like the RTX 3060 and 3060 Ti's in stock. If you find yourself in this market segment, I'd grab an RTX 3060 Ti, overclock it, or look at alternatives from AMD's as well, like the 6700 XT, 6650 XT. Those cards when overclocked also do really well. And in these segments, ray tracing isn't as important if you're probably not going to be able to utilize it anyways. Circling back to the 4060 Ti, this is not a graphics card that I'd say deserves the name of an X60 Ti name. The 3060 Ti, as I mentioned before, matched or ended up beating an RTX 2080 Super. The 2060 Super was on par or better than a 1080. The GTX 1060 matched the 980. Therefore, the expectation was that this card was supposed to be matching an RTX 3080 at the minimum. If the RTX 4060 Ti did do that and had an MSRP of $450-ish, then it would be a GPU I'd happily recommend given the way the market is currently constructed. But it's not. You're getting the same performance as last gen with an overclock at a higher price. I'd call that DOA, and since there's an abundance of 3060 Ti's and 6700 XT's in stock, this GPU will also be sitting on the shelves as well. Nvidia shouldn't be rewarded for this anti-consumer behavior. It is a shame though, and kind of sad to see that they are treating arguably the most important segment in their lineup like total crap. We're living in a time right now where buying GPUs isn't even at the top of people's priority list. Let Nvidia live in whatever fantasy land they think is reality, and they'll either learn from it or go, oh well, who cares? This was our plan all along. We didn't care about the gaming market. We care about the data center now. Either way you look at it, don't buy this card. It's a hard pass. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.